A lot of manufacturers think, oh, well, we can't provide flexibility to our hourly employees, right? They can't work from home. They need to be there. But if you create an environment where you have flexibility in terms of giving people input into which shifts they work or what jobs they work, or just give them flexibility to make changes. If anything, we've learned during this COVID situation is our lives have all changed dramatically, right? Outside of work, we're all balancing family obligations and obligations with children. And so you have to, as a manufacturing leader, think like a human being and recognize that your employees have this completely different experience happening outside. So how can you support them in that?
The IndustrialSage Executive Series, sharing the stories behind game-changing executives, their organizations, and insights into today's industry challenges.
Hello and welcome to today's episode on IndustrialSage. I am joined by Kylene Zenk, who is the Manufacturing Marketing Director at Kronos. Kylene, thank you so much for joining me today on this episode. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Danny. It's nice to be here.
Well, I'm excited to jump into today's conversation. We're going to be talking a little bit about workforce development, the challenges in workforce right now, which I don't think there are too many. That's a stupid joke. There's a few going on. So, but for those who are not familiar with Kronos, if you can tell me a little bit about, your organization, what you guys do, and what your role is.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, I'm the director of the manufacturing marketing practice at Kronos. So my role is really around developing and executing the go-to-market strategy to help educate and build awareness for how technology can help manufacturers and drive employee engagement and improve organizational performance. Great.
Well, there's a lot going on right now. Obviously, relative to COVID-19, we're not, everyone knows, unless you've been living under a rock, and even then, I think it'd be difficult to not understand what's going on. But, relative to, a lot of the changes have been happening in the space. How have you seen sort of the industry sort of shift this year, relative to COVID-19?
Yeah, I think there's been an interesting dynamic in manufacturing because the reality is many organizations in manufacturing are essential businesses. So while they have had to shift and adapt to, increased risk and concerns about health and safety, they've also had to maintain that business continuity in order to, develop products that we need to support the global community, whether that's food and, pharmaceuticals or medical devices. In different aspects. So I think the emphasis has been on, maintaining that business continuity, adjusting to, supply chain disruption and other types of disruption, but most importantly, emphasizing the focus on health and safety of the workforce and creating an environment where employees feel safe coming to work who have to go to work.
Yeah, exactly. It was interesting. And it's funny. I mean, I still feel you're mentioning with the supply chain, there's still a lot of effects that have continued to happen. Obviously, they're not as severe as they were maybe initially back in March and April when, obviously, the great toilet paper run of 2020, which has yet to be discovered why. But anyway, but obviously causing a huge, chain. And you're seeing that across several different products. I was listening recently. Was it pickles and pickles and pepperoni, for example, was I think something that was on the list right now and it's a revolving list as these companies are trying to really adapt to what is going on. So when it comes to optimizing potential in the wake of this pandemic, what areas are manufacturers really struggling the most, and how can technology help to solve some of those challenges?
Yeah, I think according to a recent study I read by Odin Technologies, 94% of manufacturers have experienced some change in demand, whether that's they've seen an increase for their products or a decrease because of people not making certain buying decisions at this time. So regardless of whether it's going up or down, manufacturers are having to figure out how to align labor to demand and really optimize their production schedules and processes, while at the same time maintaining social distancing guidelines and so many other things. So I think that is incredibly challenging for manufacturers to think about. Scheduling the workforce is already really challenging in manufacturing.
Mm-hmm.
You have employees that have certain, skills requirements or certifications that are needed to run equipment and things like that. There's, union policies and other regulatory requirements that you have to keep in mind around overtime. And now you're saying you have to make sure they're 6 feet apart on a production line, and not all production lines are designed in a way that can be reconfigured as such. So you have to put up, barriers and all these other things. So I think technology has been able to help a lot of organizations, particularly a lot of the clients we work with, because they're able to now think about how do they adapt their scheduling processes to align with those shifts. So for instance, a lot of organizations are, creating new shift patterns so that they can have smaller groups of employees working together. So you're limiting the number of people that you're interacting with at any given time. And we can help with, technology can help automate that process and make sure you're taking all those considerations into play. Another factor a lot of organizations are doing is there's an increased pressure to have sanitization and different activities happen between shifts. So as you're bringing one group of employees out, you want to make sure you're cleaning appropriately. So extending time between shifts is something that a lot of people are doing. So again, technology can help align those shifts and produce those breaks so that you make sure you have that appropriate time. And there's also just concerns around the number of people that are lining up at the door, right, to get in the facility, or in many cases in manufacturing, lining up to clock in. So how do you make sure that you have enough staggered time between shift start and end start, so you have all these employees that are coming in? That's a major concern that everyone's contending with. And as more and more, regions continue to experience influxes and infections, it's an ongoing cycle where you're having to continuously figure out how to adapt to what the present day is bringing. So it's definitely a bit of a challenge.
That's a very nice way of putting it, adapting it to what the present day is bringing you, because everything is changing by the hour. Maybe it's every 2 hours now. It's slowed down a little bit, but
Just a bit.
It totally depends. I mean, the reality of it is what you're talking about, from the ability from being able to adapt it and having technology in place to be able to put these different things in place is one thing, so that we can look at, from a health and safety standpoint. But you have this whole other, pesky thing. Let's talk about, operational efficiency, that, very early on, one of the first things that a lot of manufacturers were doing are saying, like you mentioned, hey, we're shifting schedules and shifts. We're going to have a little bit of delay. Lunch was a big thing. Like breaks times were being all staggered, and that's great in certain areas, except when you can't do that, or you've got, things are kind of layered. And so just from an output standpoint, I mean, you're kind of getting hammered even more, especially if you've got a reduced workforce on top of just, trying to adhere and make a safe environment, but yet at the same time, so much to really consider. So I imagine having some sort of, technology to be able to help sort of optimize that and look at, different areas and trends is pretty important.
Yeah, absolutely. I think your point is, a lot of companies are experiencing labor constraints right now, right? Employees are potentially sick. Many organizations have had to do layoffs or furloughs, and they're working with a reduced headcount to begin with. So they're trying to manage around all of that. So really, it's about optimizing your labor resources that you do have and aligning them to the work that needs to get done. Because ultimately you are trying to produce products in an efficient way, and in a way that's, high quality is always a major consideration as well. So I think technology can definitely play a role in optimizing the performance of your people and aligning your people to those production schedules and demand that you're experiencing.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% critical. So, kind of like moving forward on that, in regards to creating those environments, managing a large, changing workforce. Let's talk a little bit contact tracing. We're hearing about that a lot on the news in other industries. How this is how we're going to, when you have, when and if really essentially you have an outbreak, how are you able to, really isolate and basically really mitigate the risks that you have associated with it? What's sort of been your experience from Kronos's perspective?
Right. Yeah. I think from Kronos's perspective, we've actually introduced a contact tracing tool that's part of our workforce management offering, but also we've done some research and really fielded some research in this area as well. So I can talk a little bit about both of those dynamics. We just completed a study in July, and our research found that 9 in 10 employees actually, based in the US, we were focused on the US, believe that the employer has an obligation to let them know or notify them if they might have potentially come in contact with a coworker who has tested positive for COVID, right? Mm-hmm. People are concerned about their health and their well-being, and they want to know. And at the same time, the employees recognize that for an employer to know that information, there's going to have to be some level of disclosure involved. And 86% of US employees are also relatively comfortable with the idea of some type of employer-based contact tracing. Mm-hmm. So providing that information is something they want and need. What's a little bit disconcerting is that, according to another study by Mercer, who's a consultancy in the benefits and labor space, they have said that only 54% of US companies are either planning or have already started to implement a contact tracing program.
Wow.
There's a big discrepancy between what employees want and need to feel comfortable going to work and what a lot of organizations are actually planning to do. So I would say, from Kronos's perspective, our philosophy is, in many cases, you're already capturing information about your employees. So we develop workforce management tools. So you capture where employees are through their schedules, what departments they're working in, who else they're working with. We capture time and attendance information. When are employees getting to work? When are they leaving? So you can have access to that information about where your employees are throughout the day and who they may have, worked with, so that in the event you are notified by one of your employees that they're sick or potentially sick, you can let people know they should be starting to think about, potential quarantines or testing and things like that. So the faster you can get the information out to your workforce, the more effective you're going to be as an employer in reducing the risk of an infection, which that can have a detrimental impact on your entire business if you're not able to control that quickly.
Absolutely.
So contact is critical to that element.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, that can, a good word, detrimental. I mean, really to the operations there, if you're not able to kind of isolate very quickly and figure out, so that otherwise, if it takes over, we're hearing stories early on where huge, manufacturing facilities were getting, Department of Health was coming in and saying, no, you're shut down, and hearing about, tons of people calling out and, because they were sick. One thing that I'm curious about relative to the contact tracing piece, and this is something that I'm curious about your perspective on this, and that actually is around HIPAA, and privacy. How does, now it's a little bit more like generally accepted that, okay, if I suspect that I've got, the coronavirus or something, I should go get tested and all that good stuff. But as it relates to notifying your employer, and like there's a whole like privacy component to that. Do you have any insights you can share with that from Kronos?
Sure. I don't know if this is necessarily Kronos's philosophy, but I can say from what I've learned and in talking to some of our clients, what they're doing is, in order to protect the individual privacy of any individual, they set up very specific protocols in terms of, if you need to report a potential illness, there's usually some type of a generic hotline or number. So it's not that you as an individual are talking to someone and then that information gets passed through the appropriate channels, the safety and compliance group, particularly, or potentially HR, because you're right, protecting people's privacy is really important. So it's not, the contact tracing is not about identifying that Jim Smith might be sick. It's about identifying someone that you worked with last shift could be ill, and we wanted to be aware of that. So it's certainly something that organizations are aware of, and you need to be thoughtful about.
Yeah, no, great thought and consideration in terms of like for those organizations that haven't set something. As you mentioned, there's a pretty big stat of manufacturers have not set these things in place to the extent that employees rather are hoping and expecting for. So that's a great thought there. So obviously 2020, everyone would like to hit the reset button. Wants to hit redo a little bit. There was a lot of initiatives and things in plans that a lot of manufacturers, in regards to workforce, I'm sure we're looking at implementing. And because of the disruption, said, okay, we're going to table this. But what are some of those things that manufacturers need to be probably looking at that it might not necessarily be an on-fire, immediate, urgent matter quite yet, but it's probably could be a little bit of a ticking time bomb, on a back burner. Are you seeing anything like that right now?
Yeah, one of the things I've been following for the past several years is the skilled labor shortage that is occurring in manufacturing.
Yes.
So, pre-pandemic, organizations were struggling to find employees with the appropriate skill sets that are needed to do certain types of jobs. And, we've done our own research in this area, a number of organizations have said that, either attracting or retaining talent was a problem. Well, that is going to get a lot more difficult in the next few years because a large percentage of the existing manufacturing workforce is going to retire. 25% of the manufacturing workforce is over the age of 55 and thinking about retirement, in the next 5 to 10 years. And unfortunately, the next generation of employees aren't necessarily looking to manufacturing as the most kind of viable career options, right? Manufacturing has a bit of a reputation challenge in terms of not being seen as a exciting or high-tech place to work. And for those of us that work in manufacturing, we know that's not true. Technology is all around us, and the amount of digitization that's happening on the plant floor and automation. So manufacturers absolutely need to be thinking about, even with all the distractions of what's happening today, which are extremely important, how to build a talent strategy for the future, right? So how do you think about what are you doing as an individual organization to educate students in your local communities and build that talent pipeline, right? What can you do in that regard? Or how do you think about upskilling and retraining maybe some of your current workforce to support roles that are going to be opening up in the future? So I think that talent management and talent supply chain idea is something that needs a lot of attention. And we can't forget about it just because we have a lot going on. Otherwise, I think if we wait, it's going to be too late. So just keeping that front of mind and recognizing that challenge hasn't gone away. It's still going to be there when this all unfolds.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that I do feel personally a little passionate about, or a lot passionate about, because like you mentioned, it's almost like the manufacturing space has kind of gotten like a bad rap. And I want the cool Silicon Valley. I want the cool marketing. Well, I guess we were kind of in marketing, but different. I want to be in the B2C space, and I want to work in a technology software company, and whatever. I guess you guys are in a software company here. But the reality of it is that there is amazing ingenuity going on right underneath our noses. And when people realize, when you look at the last 100 to 130 years. Let's look at the U.S. history from an engineering and ingenuity innovation standpoint. It is amazing what we have accomplished. And that was largely due in part through R&D and innovation and engineering and manufacturing right there,
100%. Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I get excited about it. And I think that, yes, it has gotten a bad rap, and I'm excited to see that challenge be solved, and we're starting to see it a little bit more, well, maybe pre-COVID. It's still definitely going to be there, but it's definitely a big thing. I agree 100% with you that it needs to be solved, but I think it can be. So that's great. All right, my last question. Is there any best practices or anything that we haven't covered that you think that manufacturing company or organization should be focused on right now?
Yeah, it's tied a little bit to the last conversation we had around attracting that next generation and how to make manufacturing exciting, because it is exciting, but how to make people aware of that. I think the other thing that we need to be thinking about in manufacturing is how to create a better employee experience for the workforce. So I think traditionally manufacturing management, there's a lot of legacy old school mentality about manufacturing and shift work. And the reality is that the world of work is changing so much. Technology is impacting, every aspect of our personal lives, and it's starting to influence how we work and where we work, right? And our ability to adapt. So that really influences the whole employee experience. Your employees are going to come into the plant or the facility and expect to have access to information, right? They're able to look at their cell phones at any single day and get any bit of information they need. So they need the same access to information at work. So how do you empower them with information is something that I think is really important. And also flexibility. And this is an area a lot of manufacturers think, oh, well, we can't provide flexibility to our hourly employees, right? They can't work from home. They need to be there. But if you create an environment where you have flexibility in terms of giving people input into which shifts they work or what jobs they work, or just give them flexibility to make changes. If anything, we've learned during this COVID situation is our lives have all changed dramatically, right? Outside of work, we're all balancing family obligations and obligations with children. And so you have to, as a manufacturing leader, think like a human being and recognize that your employees have this completely different experience happening outside. So how can you support them in that? Give them flexibility. If they need to request time off because they got to take care of their kid or deal with homeschooling for the day, give them the opportunity to do that. Provide those easy avenues to make last minute changes and adapt. Your employees will appreciate it a lot and know that you recognize the challenges they're facing outside of work. So I think just thinking about a holistic employee experience and not just what they're doing when they're on the job, but how do you facilitate and create that work-life balance that many other employers and other industries are able to do. So if manufacturing can't do it, it's going to be challenging to attract talent when they can get it somewhere else.
100%. Absolutely. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, Kylene, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. I really enjoyed our conversation. I've learned a lot, especially how, one notable thing was that how a lot of manufacturers have not put some of these practices into place. Obviously, rehashing and looking at the workforce, attracting and retaining talent challenge. But if an organization who's watching and say, hey, listen, we might need to talk to these guys. What's the best way? I'm assuming go to your website. What's the URL so they can find out more about you guys?
Yeah, easy enough. It's kronos.com, KRONOS.com.
Perfect. All right. So make sure we put those in the show notes that companies can have access to that if that's something they would like to learn more about. I'm sure you have lots of resources there. And yeah, thank you again so much for your time today.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been my pleasure, Danny.
It's been great. All right. So that concludes today's Industrial Sage episode. I'm tired. It's been a long day. But thank you for listening or watching. Listen, if you have not subscribed, you need to go to IndustrialSage.com right now and you need to subscribe. Why? Because you're missing out on all kinds of great content like this episode that we just had with Kylene. And so you can be a better manufacturer. You can be a better leader in the organization. We have news, we have insights, we have data, webinars, all kinds of things that you're missing out. So go subscribe today. That's all I got for you. Thanks for watching or listening. I'll be back next week with another episode on Industrial Sage.
Industrial Sage is an open platform where companies can showcase their expertise and solutions to a captive audience of industrial professionals. Thank you for listening to this week's episode. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and while you're there, please leave us a review. Want us to tell your story? Go to IndustrialSage.com. This week's episode was produced by Rika Wiersma, filming by Donovan Jones, editing by Rika Wiersma, music composed by Oliver Michael, and executive producers Danny Gonzalez and David Karen. This is the Industrial Sage Executive Series.